Hello, everybody, and welcome to Keijsers Koning. We are available on YouTube and as well on Spotify with our artist interview. This time around, we are interviewing the curator for Terrenos, which is the ever Velasquez, wonderful artist, curator, and human being extraordinaire. She works at Charlie James Gallery in LA, but we've had the great privilege to pull her here to Texas. It was based on a couple of conversations we've had. Latin language within America, within the US. And I've been very curious about your curating overall, but especially giving voices to the Latinx population and people, and kind of giving voice to the things that have been happening, that have happened in history, and that haven't been dealt with properly or at all. And I think your voice is very important, especially nowadays with what we're dealing with and this kind of comb over, no pun intended. But yes, I'm so honored that you've curated this show. I would like to invite you to explain a little bit your thinking about the show,
Okay.
how it came together. And I also just want to talk about your vision as a curator in general, how you kind of came to be.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you again for having me. I think that's an absolute honor and pleasure to be working with you. Not only outside of our galleries and our friendship, but also to be here in Texas, in Dallas, to be able to curate this show with so many important voices from Texas and Los Angeles, Mexico City. So with Terrenos, specifically, when I curate shows, for me, it's thinking about how I process what's going on in the world spiritually, with the political climate always changing, how we could go about having these conversations within the art world to give people their voice, and at the same time to create an open dialogue without aggression. I think a lot of the reasons we have a lot of difficulties within one another and expressing our opinions and ideas is because one of the most important things that you could have as a person is to be able to listen to one another. And most people are just unable to listen, and then just very quickly cut people off in their ideas. So this is Terrenos is a visual conversation show for people to really sit and think about everything that's going on.
Yeah, and it's like kind of interesting to see the show up now and see these really individual pieces. And then though it makes a very cohesive tapestry almost of these voices. That's what I really enjoyed about it. Because it's interesting. I trust you, and you get this PDF and you get all these different visions. I was like, wow, how are we going to pull this together thematically or just visually? And it was a lot easier than I anticipated. Even if there is this kind of individualism coming out, there is this undertone that's just being touched. I think we should mention some of the names that are in the show.
Okay.
There's quite a few.
Yeah.
If I may let you do the honors before I start butchering names.
So in the show Terrenos, we are presenting Cande Aguilar, Verónica Gaona, Audrey Rodríguez, Christopher Nájera, Ruben Luna, Franceska Alvarado, Mitzi Falcon, Jessica Carolina González, Laura Ortiz Vega, Jenelle Esparza, Alejandra Canchola, Patrick Martinez, Narsiso Martinez, Ozzie Juarez, Jackie Amézquita, Erick Medel, Elmer Guevara, Eduardo Soto, Daniela Garcia Hamilton, Julio Alarcón, Manuel Lopez, and Glenn Hardy Jr.
Our initial conversation kind of started for this show, me coming here to Dallas and me kind of looking at, okay, I'm going to see certain aspects of Latin culture. And it was very hard for me to find it, so to speak, and kind of this kind of. So our initial conversation was really coming forth about difference between Latin voices within the arts here in Texas versus what you were seeing in Los Angeles, which I think in Los Angeles is to a certain extent established visually. Here in Texas, it was harder for me to kind of see it, find it. Over the years, I've now discovering it much more and seeing it much more in these, but it's hidden. And that was my intrigue, where I was like, oh, I expected to see it much more pronounced within Texas. And of course, it's once you're here in the state, you kind of feel that oppression and fear that I guess in California must feel a little different. I mean, there, but we can't speak of it this point, because
Yeah.
of course it's different.
Yeah.
But that was kind of for me to ask you how would you see it here in Texas as far as putting together a show like this?
Okay. For me personally, I kind of in coming to Texas, when it came to DIY punk scene, where I came from zine making, also from the art world, having these conversations with artists here, Arizona, pretty much anywhere that I go, I saw a lot of similarities between myself and other artists, where I think the part of the immigrant experience is what holds you down always is your family, right? So it's this whole family structure, and that being the family you're born into or your chosen family. And then that's how you're able to create within the community. So for me, it was very open, going both ways when it came to working with artists in Texas, Arizona, Mexico, and the United States and Los Angeles. When it comes to the gallery art world, I feel that space, the museum space, I kind of feel that artists of color kind of feel like, oh, I'm not allowed to be here. I'm not allowed to show up at these places. But, there aren't signs that say that you're not allowed. So you just kind of have to push the envelope a little bit and, your comfort level, and go and make and go look at art, try to create within your community, and try to see what you're able to create together and individually. For me, I think a lot of when it came to putting this show together, what I thought about a lot was like the history of Mexico, in a sense of this is all Mexico. If you boil down, it's all Mexico. And the only thing that separates us are these man-created borders. And then having that conversation about, okay, so we're basically a bunch of cousins and we've been separated by these man-made borders, but you feel that love and that energy going back and forth. You have these conversations and dialogue, a lot of similarities in the visuals of the artwork, but also very different because of region and everything else that goes around it, but very authentically coming from the heart and the spirit of being immigrants, first generation and onward. I think it's that openness was able to create the whole visual of the show.
How did you open up that door, metaphorically, so to speak, for the art world? Because your voice has become over the years very prominent within Los Angeles and outside of it. You've kind of become known as this leader, envisioning how these voices can have a platform, come a part of a larger fabric. I don't want to say that it's only about that type of identity, but it's much more having a place on the larger field of the art world, and not just in this isolation of, oh, this is immigrant art, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I should say immigrant because people were here before basically the US was settled. How did you go about that door? How did you kick it in?
Kicking in that door, I think it goes about just like putting yourself out there. I think for me, very early on as a kid, I think I've always known who I was. And I've always been taught to like just show up and always show up for yourself, because the first person who should always show up for you is yourself, and no one else shows up. To have that confidence or the ask, even, you know what I mean? Ask questions, and then basically just let me see if I could just walk in here or not. They could tell me no, I could go away.
Yeah.
Or, I was brought up with my mom always saying, el que no habla no come. In translation is the person who doesn't talk doesn't eat.
Yeah.
So if you start asking questions and you start, creating opportunities for yourself. Sometimes it's just as simple as just writing down your ideas. Hypothetically, if I was going to create a show, what would it look like? What it would be called, and what energies and conversations I would be having. And then just having those, just writing it all down. I think it takes time to be able to put a show together. And I think that's just my natural process. And at the same time, doing your studio visits, I find it important to meet with the artists, talk with them, have that face-to-face time. And sometimes, you're unable to because of time or distance. But, luckily we live in a time now where it's like technology could help us with that.
Yeah.
But having that one-on-one time, making sure that everybody vibes, because for me, it's like, I think that's number one. Like you have to like me as much as I like you. And not just with your art practice, but we need to be able to like want to work with each other.
Yeah.
I think that's what gives the authentic feel of the whole show and energies of the show. I think that's it. creating these new versions of families in a sense within having these shows happen.
It's funny, the saying that you were mentioning, it reminded me of something in Dutch, which is the saying that yes, you can get, no, you have.
Yeah.
It's that same idea of just like, yeah, this is, no is easy. This is just, that's walking past. And yes is something that you can get through asking or through knocking on the door. I think also is interesting about that, and what should be mentioned is that you come from a writing background. You're reminded of that story, which I hope you will tell us here, your first encounter with being published.
Okay.
It's very similar as well to just how kind of start opening up the door of the punk scene of do it yourself, and literally you're like, well, if I have to do it myself, then why not this? Why not create that space?
Yeah, why not create that space? You know, have just like zine making, put those ideas out there. Whatever your idea is, put it out there.
But can you tell us about that publication where you were?
Okay, yeah, Razor Cake Fanzine based out of Los Angeles, California is one of the still existing over 20 years nonprofit DIY punk zine. So there I started it and ran a poetry page for the community through the zine, also interviewed bands and yeah, interviews in general. And then I was asked because of that family there, I was asked by Mike Falloon to write a story about World Series banner drop that happened during the World Series in the Dodger Stadium when, you know, our trans friends were being attacked by the administration. And there was a huge banner drop where during the World Series. So to write that story for Zisk, it's a baseball fanzine. And then we were lucky enough to get that acquired by Cooperstown.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, so.
It's funny because I have a place not far from Cooperstown. So it's kind of funny how small the world is.
Yeah.
Have you ever been?
No.
Oh, we're going to have to drag you.
Yeah, no,
I
plan to go and be like, this is
mine.
This is mine.
We never expected that, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing where you find yourself through these ventures. Kind of alluded to it by doing visits and kind of aligning yourself with people that you want to work with. Do you find yourself in a certain aesthetic, or how do you go about that lane of vision?
For me, I know what I like immediately, and I'm very good about knowing what it is that I like. And I'm not prejudiced to just, oh, I only look at paintings. I only take painting seriously. I love all of it. I love, you know, photography. I love screen printing. I love textile, sculpture, all of it. So for me, you know, I know immediately when I like things. I know immediately when you know, in doing visits with artists, like, hey, you know, I know that the artist process is kind of like very open, like let's experiment with a lot of things. And I'm like, okay, when I'm invited to do visits with artists, I'm like, okay, like right here, this is where it's at. Like, this is where people pay attention to. Don't forget about these right here. They need a little bit more time in the oven, but you're getting there.
Yeah.
And we have these conversations back and forth. I've been lucky in my time to be working in the art world that I have artists all the time like reach out to me however they can, and they're like, hey, would you ever do a visit? You know, and I may tell them like, you know, this may not be the perfect fit for where I work for anything I'm working on currently, but I will keep you in mind, or I'll put you in touch with other people that this could.
That's very generous. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's important, you know, I think if I'm able to give a little bit of time to any artist and it's able to help them better their art practice, better their business, which is something they don't teach you in school, they could probably share that with somebody else.
Yeah.
I think we're stronger together as a community.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should shy away from some of these topics.
Yeah.
Which, you know, have been painted, especially in the art world, so much of like, what is business? And it's an integral part of it. At the end of the day, money does give you a certain amount of freedom to continue a practice and to continue growing and to continue doing that. It's not that it should be a motivation, but it's a part of something.
Yeah.
And I think also, especially when you start looking at artists that we're now speaking of, money is sometimes not always there. So like how it becomes an important part of it, or an expectation from other family structures and family members, that pressure. And how do you kind of keep your practice alive?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like in the early years for myself, and working in the communities, in Los Angeles, working with self-help graphics, screen printing, and organizing in women's or art groups that I was in, and mural painting and all of that, creating those communities. I think there was a time, like when it comes to myself, when it comes to like my parents, in a sense, that they were like, "What are you doing? You're wasting your time.
Yeah.
This is just a waste of time." Now they see it much different. They kind of are like more accepting of what it is that I do. They're like, "Oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
You weren't wasting your time."
Well, I think it's also it's sometimes tough for a previous generation, especially in immigrant status, where it's
Yeah.
like survival. All of a sudden, they see something that's not about necessarily survival of immediacy, but survival of spirit, of
Yeah,
being.
definitely. And it's always that too, where it's like, you have to be a doctor or a lawyer. You're
Yeah.
going to survive. You're going to
Yeah.
be a doctor or lawyer.
Well, it's that theory that I have of the three generation, the first generation that comes across the border or whichever is about survival, literally putting food on
Yeah.
the table. Second generation is proving how good they are to the first generation. Then
Yeah.
the third generation is like, who are we? What are we
Yeah.
doing here? And they have more space to do that and question that. It also reminds me of that project he recently finished at Threes with Ozzie Juarez and about the meat, which I loved so much that he did this installation where at an environment where it's all about high-end art, money, etc. He had a meeting, or of objects, of trading things,
Yeah.
which is such an important activity, on the weekend. So you were telling me a story, or I think it was Ozzie, excuse me, Ozzie was telling a story. It wasn't so much about the money exchange, but it was more about the doing something with the family and then being part of that community.
Yeah.
And I was kind of saddened to hear the other day that environment, because of where we are right now, is changing.
Oh, yeah.
That there's no more, stores are closed, but usually the Saturday is a bustling interaction of
Yeah, definitely. And we've shared that conversation and lived experience with myself and Ozzie. Like, people talk about, okay, why is it that you personally are successful at what you do? And I always put it back to that. You know what I mean? I grew up working in Los Callejones of Los Angeles and working in swap meets. So that was my business school early on as a kid. So having that conversation with Ozzie about how he had opened up his swap meet at Freeze this year, and having that interaction at the same time, creating that community where it's like they're going in and finding a toy that resonates with them, and then you find that bond where it's like, oh, okay, wow, we both liked this toy.
Well, and I admire that it was done with genuineness and not just an expose thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it feels very natural because it is genuine, and at the same time it's creating that community and like just giving, which is also part of like the immigrant experience, and how we go about sharing, how things that are handed down still tell stories for generations then, and continue to for generations to come.
Yeah, and I will say that what's so interesting about also this show is the variety of you touched on a little bit, but of the material. We have things of earth, we have things of textiles, we have photography, and each one telling such individual stories about directly relating to status of immigration or just being different within a space, celebrating that moment of belonging, whether the belonging is a small group or whether it's partaking within a larger conversation. And I'm very happy to see that kind of come to fruition now and seeing it on the wall. I'd like to kind of take this moment and kind of talk about some of the works that we're seeing. We're definitely not going to have a conversation about what's your favorite.
Oh, yeah. I love them all. For me, I love them all. Like, I always tell people, like any show that I curate or anything that I work on is a love letter to the community, the artists, everybody that comes together to making the shows happen. Like, this is what we created together.
It's that exchange that you talked about, which is very generous of you. As we're sitting here anyway, why don't we just direct our attention to starting out with some of the textiles, since that's from left to all the way around. We have Laura Oritz Vega, who's created these panels that almost looked embroidered, but actually they're layered on in a thread next to each other, creating these gorgeous tones, colors of cityscapes, doorways that close, but at the same time allow for graffiti kind of to use that expression and openness. Do you want to tell me a little bit about who, what, and where?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, Laura Ortiz Vega is based out of Mexico City. So we met in Mexico City and, had done our visits and our chats. I feel that her work is really original when it comes to textile making, in a sense of not only her process, but she's really good at, walking around the neighborhoods, taking photographs, creating these pieces based out of those photographs. And these two specifically that were chosen for the show, I thought would be a perfect example of that when it comes to Mexico City, thinking about the architecture, that Spanish influence, the street culture when it comes to the graffiti, and just how beautiful all of the awnings are, and the brightness of color. It kind of puts you right there in that area, right there in that space. And the beautiful way that she was able to put in the ironwork within the windows on the very top of the doors, I think was excellent. I really, these were the two that I chose out of the works that she made to come to Dallas.
Yeah, they feel very collaged, I must say,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting. It's all that layering. And then we have behind you just Jenelle Esparza, and
Yeah.
she created these weaves.
Yeah.
Best way to describe them, and as these border phases. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think with Jenelle Esparza's work, like, she's a beast. Like, she's been able to create these herself. I think there's a lot to be said as a woman creating these textiles about this generational knowledge and about the land. She's so passionate about the work that she makes. These two specifically that we're showing in the show they're titled Massacre of the Borders 1 and Massacre of the Borders 2. And I feel that they really have that great integration and that energy and that history within them when it comes to having those conversations about our borders, what has continued to happen, not only with colonization, but what is still currently happening with women and indigenous women being murdered at these borders, and then having everybody play like, oh, well, it's not our jurisdiction, and what happens.
The anonymous dead.
Yeah, the anonymous dead. So she's able to create these beautiful pieces.
Yeah, I love the separation of them, even though they're connected.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
like two different pieces, and then remnants of gold thread kind of coming through, which harpers back to, of course, older conversation of colonization in the beginning. I mean,
Definitely.
the way the Spaniards arrived.
And that conversation about cotton in itself, and how cotton was harvested, and that labor that was involved in having access to cotton, and that labor that still continues to this day.
So to talk about labor, I think then a good follow-up is Erick Medel, who has embroidered on denim.
Yeah.
This is a particular scene. I'm sorry, a particular scene of balloons and a balloon man. And I just love the perspective of it, the kind of explosion of shapes. But
yeah, definitely. So with Erick Medel, they're all woven on their thread paintings sewn by him. He's from Mexico, from Puebla. These thread paintings are all done on denim, and this is a beautiful image of this like balloon man who looks really happy to be possibly selling a balloon, and all these beautiful balloon animals around him. To me, I think it's a familiar image for everybody, like not just as a child but also as an adult, and having that different conversation, once as a child, like, oh, wanting one of these balloons, and then either being happy that you're getting something or heartbroken that you're not getting it. Yeah, when it departs. And then, like that conversation into adulthood, like, oh, now that you have the accessibility to buy a balloon for a child, are you going to or not going to?
That brings us to Daniela Garcia Hamilton, who's
right behind us. Yeah, so with Daniela's work, painting, and a lot of it is embroidery and thread work. And this one I chose because I really love that he's wearing these really great, like, kind of wrestling 80s like sunglasses, and in between you can see like the delicateness and that beautiful sheen that she's created to give that illusion of the glasses. He's just here checking out everything that's going on, and looks so cool doing it.
Well, the saturation of color.
Yeah.
It's crazy how that goes in between the paint texture and then actually the thread texture as well. Dennis, I would like to draw our attention to some of the photography, which I'm excited to see, because I think photography is being
I love photography.
Kind of silenced in the past couple of years.
I think for me personally, I think it's easy to like a painting. When it comes to being a photographer or a screen maker, like in screen printing, there's vigor And there's like, you have to have passion to do those things, because these are mediums that you're not guaranteed that people are going to want to buy. You're not guaranteed that they're going to be very lucrative, but it takes so much time to create these works. With that, we have like Mitzi Falcon. Like I got the pleasure of meeting her at Untitled Miami two years ago, 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
And with this beautiful body of work that she was doing, we had a great conversation about how they came about. Like for me, I always know what I like immediately, but this stopped me in my tracks walking around the fair.
They said they do.
And I was like, oh, she was there. We got to talk, and she was telling me like, yeah, this is like her lived experience. There's different kinds of layering throughout the photography of the construction of the buildings being made, and then right in front you get to see these beautiful images of these her trans friends are the actual people working construction, where these buildings were all being constructed in front of her apartment, and they all started to become friends. She was a photographer, and then slowly in having conversations developed their friendship and the comfort level to be able to allow them to be photographed. I think when it comes to photography, specifically portraits, I think the photographer has the power in being able to show you as they see you. You know what I mean? So that's why you could be the best portraitist as a photographer, but you're not going to make everybody look good.
No, and it's also about a trust between
the
taker and the giver.
Definitely. And you see it beautifully amazed. Like they're strong. They have a very romantic feel to them. Like, yeah, I love this work and the series.
Yeah, it's amazing how honest the subject matters are, or the subjects are.
Yeah.
That brings it to Jessica Carolina González.
Love her. Like, she's, been doing visits with her for the last 2 years. She got these works specifically were from her MFA show, and she was having these conversations and letting us into her life when it came to her own personal lived experience when it comes to being Salvadorian, but first generation, and having to be there as sometimes people say that in brown families that the strongest man of the house is usually the firstborn daughter, right? So in this case with Jessica, like, she has to be the strength for her mom, and having these conversations, these difficult conversations sometimes when it comes to ancestral lands and what happens, like, when the natural process and, we start passing away and you have your ancestral lands, and then this either fight ensues within families or not. And then just these really beautiful, touching photographs of the terrenos of, you get to see some beautiful cattle in one, and then some beautiful just landscapes. And I think I love how she just prints it. You feel like that. They feel like paintings, which I really enjoy.
Absolutely. I also think it's interesting how it's a subject matter that brings kind of memories of what you leave behind. That element of there is a heritage to be had back home, even though it's not. And sometimes that kind of friction that's there for a lot of people, I think that will trigger quite a few things. And that's being an immigrant myself, there's not a simple singular story. It's not like I left home and it's done and then now it is my new home. There's always these remnants that kind of persevere and become our part of you, whether you like it or not, and kind of recognizing that. And it's a lot about choices, but that doesn't mean that the parts that you were are going to let go.
Yeah.
Which I always find very fascinating.
Definitely. And then like another photography work that we could mention is Verónica Gaona, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Just heavy photography, but at the same time, like heavy industrial strength in what she's creating through metalwork. I think to me, one of my favorite things about talking about art and meeting artists, to me, I like to look at the work, feel the work, and then in my head, I think about, oh, is this person like female or male or not? Sometimes that comes to mind. And when it came to Verónica's work, I feel that it felt very, very masculine, but very female, which I really enjoyed in her work. Where most people would just assume it's a man making this work. And it's, I think you could see all of it. And this one specifically, I like that you're seeing the farm work being done, which is a little bit different from the other works that she's made, where it's like family photographs and that conversation about the family truck being like the workhorse.
Yeah.
And how you're able
Yeah,
to.
that's definitely how this gets read. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's also that kind of structure making the car culture in and of itself
Yeah.
in the Latin culture and how
Yeah.
important that is, where that's coming from, and that all comes together. And I like that you have this literal translation of an image making into something new and making into something that seems very harsh.
Yeah.
It's metal, it's it's heavy,
Yeah.
but at the same time there's a delicacy to them.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also her way of celebrating like the life when it comes to there's work life and then there's after work. So, being into like cumbias tumbadas and this truck culture as well. So
Yeah.
I think, she's got a great art practice. This is a great piece, and I wanted to include in the show.
Absolutely. And I think talking about materials in that way, I think it's interesting to then go to Jackie Amézquita, who created work out of soil.
Yeah. So Jackie Amézquita is from Guatemala, and she created these beautiful works. Here we have a triptych. This is the Texas triptych, where she sourced all this soil. Believe it or not, this woman, she's a beast. Like, she's the smallest little woman on earth, but the mightiest. Like, she sourced all this soil by hand, and then it's a combination of the soil, this being from Texas specifically, close to the border, and adding a mixture of masa, and they're baked in a conventional oven.
It's amazing, and they're so heavy.
Mhm.
And then they're finished off also soldered, which is important to mention in copper.
In copper, and then it has limestone around the corners. And she wanted to have that conversation with limestone, and how it was a tool and a material used in the pyramids, and copper itself has all of its natural properties for healing. So having all that mixed conversation of generational healing and generational trauma all in one, and how these borders are inflicted on us. And
well, and it's also it will change, it will oxidize. There will certain things you can't control. And working with something like earth, which is normally not able to solidify, it's always changing. So it's kind of very daring material to kind of use to make a statement, and at the same time not being fully sure where that statement will end up as time will go. And I think what's interesting then would be Patrick Martinez. Do you want to speak a little bit on this?
Definitely. So with Patrick's piece, smaller than he usually works when it comes to these landscape pieces, but a beautiful depiction of this beautiful jaguar serpent, which, talking about indigeneity, on this beautiful kind of stucco looking wall with the bougainvillea, bougainvillea, lives everywhere and is resilient in itself. And I think those conversations together are really great when it talks about our experience and giving us the strength to continue to create. These are images that were important ages ago and continue to be important for our perseverance and our strength. And for me, it was important to have his piece next to Jenelle, next to Jackie, because we're having that conversation of land, of fiber, flora and fauna, also with that conversation about the borders, forest borders, and it being unnecessary.
Well, and I love that he's using that flower, since that normally is indigenous flowers for the islands. It wasn't on Mexico until the Spaniards kind of brought it there, and then started to immigrate. And I just love that this flower is actually such a great representation of
definitely
spreading those aspects of it. And then speaking of flowers, since we'll take a visual jump to Alexandria Canchola, great picture of mother.
Yeah, I love that piece. I feel like everybody feels, I think the way that she was able to compose this piece, everybody feels like they know that woman, or they know that woman and they know that child.
Or that image, the way the composition. Yeah.
So I felt it would be like a perfect piece to add to the show about that. Like, what your strength is always going to be your family and home, and how we're able to grow and create together. I felt it was a beautiful, warm image to be included, and very complimentary, like in having conversations with like Daniela Hamilton.
And so speaking of familiarity, of course, we have to mention Audrey Rodríguez.
Oh, okay.
Created these kind of hyper-realistic desserts or snacks or whichever that are then sitting in this plastic bag very nonchalantly, and so reminiscent of visiting Mexico or just going anywhere on the streets.
Definitely. I think when it comes to the sculptural piece, like, because she did have a painting and a sculptural piece, I think when it comes, I wanted to include something like that in the show, because one of the things that brings us all together is like food, right? Like just the simple fact of sharing food together and having that conversation about how, you know, migration itself has how it's changed and created what it is that we eat. You know, specifically, you know, you mentioned like the bougainvillea is something that was brought in and not natural here, just like eucalyptus wasn't. So for me, I felt like, yeah, let's, in our visits, we were like, what, and then it became a conversation about what specific pieces of bread would be in there, because when it comes to all of the Mexican sweetbreads, like they all have a name. So, you know, of course there's a concha in there. And then we talked about putting el pan de muerto, so the celebratory piece of bread that's for Day of the Dead that's typically used. And then the other third piece, you know, because she's able to make so many different ones. I told her, I haven't seen you make a niño envuelto, which is the little swirly one, which is one of my personal favorites. And we were laughing about how that's the name of it. So niño envuelto roughly translates to a wrapped up child. So it's like a little swirly and has coconut on the outside. So it's really beautiful to see it all in there, and it just looks and feels like, you know what, you went just to the panaderia and you went and got your pieces and you left. And then the painting as well, with all the aguas frescas, you think about like that hot day and you just want something to drink that isn't water but not soda.
Speaking of Day of the Dead, of course, that's going to bring us to Franceska Alvarado. Certainly her work is dealing with elements of passing and life.
Yeah.
Or at least that the feeling it exudes.
Yeah, definitely. I love her work so much. Like when it comes to, you know, these personal works, or like the still lifes that she creates, I think they embody a lot of what it is to be brown in our experience when it comes to like surrealism, our folklore, what it is to like continue to thrive and to be amongst all odds and just like continue to push. Yeah, I feel this piece so much, because I feel like sometimes we burn the candle at both ends, but we got to keep going, right?
Absolutely. We speak a little bit on talk about surreal realism. I mean, I think of Christopher Nájera's work, because there is that immediate recognition and that this or understanding of something, and then as you look closer, you don't quite understand what's happening.
Yeah, I love his work so much. I feel like that super poetic, like in all the works that he makes. And in the two works in the show, because he has two, we have this one that's like there could be at a rodeo or a party at a plaza, jaripeo, and then we have the other one with the two gentlemen over here kind of like talking on the plaza, which is kind of that interaction that you see of different people coming together and, you know, what happens and what is going on, you know, the simpleness of just gathering and how it's important to create that community.
And speaking about gathering, that brings me to Narciso Martinez.
Okay.
Because he's brought together two figures we wouldn't necessarily expect. You want to speak a little bit on his image?
Okay, yeah. So on Narciso's piece right here, he decided it's a self-portrait of Narciso with Prince Charles.
Okay.
So this is one of the few pieces that Narciso actually, in his own words, writes about the piece itself. So you get to see it. You can't visually see it, but when it's off the wall, you see his writing about how this box was gifted to him, and thinking about the old labels when it comes to the boxes, the produce boxes that he collects to make these works out of, and how they have this combination of this imagery of like regal white people, and it comes to the harvest of these fruits and the actual labor being of brown people.
Yeah, I always loved the way he uses materials kind of as these personal undertones and things that you wouldn't necessarily associate affinities to. Yeah. But you know, their boxes, they do have larger stories. And talking about materials being introduced that may not be seen as having certain value, I think Elmer Guevara is a great example of where we see a figure being obstructed by a newspaper, or at least a wrapping of some form.
With Elmer's piece, this is a piece in a kitchen with his father holding the newspaper, and I love this piece because it kind of felt like, okay, his dad kind of looks like he's upset at what he's reading in the newspaper, or probably upset with you with something you did. And then you have just like in most of Elmer's work, he does this really beautiful transparency where you get to see on the newspaper what it was specifically that he was looking at within that piece. So I feel it's a beautiful little piece about, you know, home life and all the things that bond us or don't bond us when it comes to what's going on in the world around us that we couldn't be able to control or not necessarily be able to control fully.
Yes, exactly. The simplicity of life structures. Speaking of home settings, we have the work by Glenn Hardy Jr., Unconditional Love, which...
Oh, I love Unconditional Love. I think, you know, Glenn Hardy, when it comes to his art practice, I think is really good at showing you, you know, that heart, that love within the family structure. And with this one, you know, you got two boys with a bunch of dogs, and you know, to me it feels like, okay, I know these boys. Like I either know them from the neighborhood or I feel like they're my cousins.
Yeah.
Bonding with these dogs, and they have so many different kinds of dogs in this piece. There's like 7 or 8 dogs, and you're just kind
there's
of like,
there's
okay.
quite a few. And
Yeah.
I love his use of color actually, which was
Yeah.
a real nice surprise to see once you're standing in front of the painting.
Yeah.
It's the, you know, the white's not white, is this like layering of tones.
Yeah, and I feel it has a timeless energy to it too. It could be that could have easily existed in the 60s, 70s or onwards because of how it's painted.
Absolutely, and how little would change, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's next to Manuel Lopez, which I think is also interesting to see that type of layering and taking images that he collects while he's walking, correct? And
Yeah.
kind of this urban setting, and it creates a new
Yeah, he
urban vibe.
likes to do his compositions and drawings of landscapes physically, like not through pictures, he just sketches. And so in this one, he was having that conversation about all these visual crosses that you see and how he was just like tripping out on how many there are, even on the building on the very far end. There's like a big cross in the middle, and having that conversation about the landscape in LA specifically.
And then we have on the table, I suppose, two, one on the wall as Ruben Luna, who amazingly built all these
I know.
boxes out of like found material and
Yeah.
exquisitely detailed.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that Ruben Luna is art practice is the way he comes up with it. I feel like the compositions are super tight and great, and it feels like you know who this belongs to. Perfect example of rascuachismo elevated and at the same time shown in a perfect way, where it's like, you know, things that may be discarded, and that conversation about like being, you know, immigrants as the original DIYers, like making something out of whatever you have available to you.
Yeah, the quick music vibe with alcohol and perfume. What else do you need in life, right?
Music, right?
A good ring. And also on the table is Julio Alarcon with his group, great tafreo of dogs.
Yeah.
Kind of mauling at each other and in a
Yeah,
maze, playful.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, you're going to see a lot of dogs in the show. And with the dogs, I have that conversation of like, okay, one of the simplest loves we could have in our life is that and the love of a dog, right? And all of that complexity when it comes to being like a dog owner or person that belongs to a dog, because that's a relationship in itself. And this piece, I feel, is beautifully executed, and all the different personalities of the dogs that you see. You're either... And just like in life, you know what I mean? You're one of these dogs.
Curious which one were you?
Yeah, you know.
I think I know which one.
I'm the happy ass one over there, like not paying attention to the...
No, you're the one with the blood.
No.
Yes. So, and that leaves us with two works which I think have a great exchange with one another. And that is Cande Aguilar and Eduardo Soto. And I love this kind of story that you have between the two.
Yeah, I felt that I wanted to have both of those together, in the sense of both of them, you know, are really good at creating works with the brightness of color, rich color, which I feel speaks a lot about brown people in itself when it comes to our palette and what we like. You know, in Eduardo's piece, you know, in the foreground, you see some Quieros, in the background, you know, one of the Mexican masters, and having that conversation about how a lot of people believe that, you know, if it wasn't for Quinqueros coming to Los Angeles, maybe the Chicano Monatorium wouldn't have happened because of like the murals that he created while he was there. So I really liked that's why I picked this piece to be in the show. I felt it would be a perfect combination of that whole conversation along with Cande, like a combination of that street art and like a traditional painting in the background.
Yeah, and I love the way what you said about the muralist allowing people to be seen. And I think that's the importance, which we may not have touched on in this particular conversation, but that importance of murals is not having an environment where you see yourself or see your culture.
Yeah, definitely.
And being on the walls, being the stores, being an immigrant, you want to decorate the things that you own, and murals kind of grew out of that. Of course, there's other traditions of murals. We're being shortened with it, but I think that is an interesting thing, a good thing to also touch on within the show. But I think I believe that's everyone, and I just wanted to again thank you so much for putting this show together. I really appreciate being able to put a little light on you as well as a person, as just a visionary. Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, no, thank you.